So my name is David Cobb. I have the proud, distinct honor of managing the Stein Baraka campaign. I think it's really important that we acknowledge it was the Stein Baraka campaign because our two candidates together were not just speaking truth to power, but speaking truth about power. It was a different phenomenon that was going on. So although Ajamu is not here with us physically, Jill and I and Mel and others have had the privilege of continuing to work with Ajamu. But now Jill Stein is with us here, when we are, by the way, at the Green Party of California State Assembly. So can you plan this crowd and everybody say, hey! Because we are mighty here, but by the time this is said and done, there will be 10, 15, up to 20,000 people having watched this on the Green News Network. Right? We ain't just going to hate on the corporate media. We are becoming the media. Because we are about to hear from the lady who should be President of the United States, Dr. Jill Stein.
Thank you to all of you. Thank you to the Green Party of California. And
got a projector.
do we need it? Let's see. It has been a long day. I'll keep going here in the meantime. Okay. Nothing like an on switch. All right. Thanks to that man over there. And thanks to that other man. Where did he go? Because there's no one else who could have managed our campaign. And if you think it's hard to run for president, it's actually much harder to be the campaign manager of a campaign for president. So can we please give a big thank you to And we went through, I'd say 3 or 4 temporary campaign managers. No one would agree to actually take the job because it was too daunting until we twisted David's arm and tricked him into it. But we're all better for it, and what an amazing campaign it was. But to me, the fulfillment of the campaign is what's going on right here, what the Green Party of California is doing. And I think you all should be so proud, because what happens in California will not stay in California. You are changing the world here in California. You've been, I think you led the pack for the percentage of green votes. You've been leading the pack in registered Greens. You've definitely been leading the pack in elected Greens. And now you are leading the pack in becoming a gets stuff done party, which also we need across the country. So again, thank you for leading the charge. And it all comes at exactly the right time, because we are in this just unimaginable moment of peril and possibility. They both go together, and people are really ready for this change. In the election, as you know, the 2 candidates from the major parties being forced down our throats were the most disliked and untrusted in history. We were probably just one debate away from a political revolution had we been able to break through. But we got so much farther than we've ever gotten before. And the fulfillment of that work and that promise is exactly what's going on right here and now, by developing a really capable and empowered party that can get the work done, that can support the candidates. This is, for me, this is a dream come true, and it's happening right here and now, especially the fact that it's happening here in Kearns County and in Bakersfield. And I want to give a big thank you to Wanda and Jean Ford for making this happen. So for the people out there on Facebook and on the Green News Network who don't know about what's going on in Bakersfield and Kearns County, it is so cosmically right that this conference is happening here, that this convention is happening here, because Bakersfield is what the future looks like for America if we the people do not take charge. This is where the fossil fuels reign supreme, where there are frack towers and oil rigs, I think, all over the place, where there are chemical refineries. I drove here in the night. It was like driving through a moonscape with all these, kind of weird, strange, otherworldly, kind of scary things with weird lights flashing, coming through the fog, which, you could see about 2 feet in front of you as you drove down the highway. This is also where agribusiness reigns supreme. It is where the chemical industry runs free, literally, into the water and into the air. And this is sort of the poster child of what the economy looks like, what our food system looks like, what our energy system looks like when corporate America rules the day, as they do rule the day more and more. And as much as we abhor the outcome of this election, it's not like this was a surprise, because neoliberalism basically paves the way to neo-fascism. And let me explain what I mean by that. Yes, neoliberalism is kind of this idea that we let the markets, the markets, as if it was some, intelligence unto itself. It's not really. It's a manipulated, markets are where the biggest predator runs free. It's where there is no referee and the biggest bully, rules the schoolyard. And that's kind of what neoliberalism is, where the banks rule the day, where the economy's financialized, where workers are thrown under the bus, where austerity is wages are kept down. That is neoliberalism. And it goes together with militarism, because it's all about keeping markets open as well and inflicting multinational corporations on markets. That's neoliberalism. And what you get with that is that people have been thrown under the bus for long enough that they basically go into revolt. And history tells us that it's in times of great stress and adversity that we see fascism rise up in Italy, between the wars in Germany, and what's happening right now all over the world, actually, where working people are being thrown under the bus. And it's a really, it's an exciting thing to think, what is it that seems to be standing up against fascism? In Austria, where a fascist was about to win the election a couple months ago, who was it that stopped them? It was a Green Party candidate who won the presidency in Austria, defeating the fascists. This is also going on right now in the Netherlands, where there is another fascist who's threatening to win the election, and it is the Green candidate, a 30-some-year-old Green Party candidate, who's actually rising up out of the opposition. That can stop it is a truly radical progressive agenda, which unfortunately is not upheld by the Democratic Party, which it takes the Green Party to actually get behind and stand up for. So that's what we're doing. And we're doing that just in time, because this is a crisis not only of fascism, it's a crisis of jobs, of a generation trapped into unpayable student loan debt, Black lives on the firing line, immigrants facing mass deportations, and a climate in meltdown. And I don't know if people have been following the science lately, but just like a week and a half ago, there was a new development in climate science that people had been hoping we wouldn't hear for decades perhaps, but all of a sudden it's here now, and that is the massive meltdown of the permafrost has just been documented. A recent article in Geology, the academic journal Geology, documented that 10% of the land mass in northwest Canada now shows massive, massive impacts. Like mountains are collapsing because they've lost their frozen infrastructure base, and huge sinkholes in the ground, and it's like 10% of northwest Canada. That's like enormous, and if that's going on the continents, you can imagine what's going on in the water, which is the other place where the permafrost has been stored. Permafrost is basically methane waiting to happen. This is the most powerful greenhouse gas, and it's known to be a massive accelerator. This is one of those tipping points that will accelerate climate change. So when you had Jim Hansen 2 years ago, I think, saying in a paper, an academic paper, that we could see 10 feet of sea level rise and more, and he said 10, 20 or more feet of sea level rise as soon as 2060. He gave about a 100-year time span, but said it was more likely to be closer to the upfront end rather than the distal end, because of just the way the studies are working. The better the models get, the closer the date becomes. And now you have to add into that the impact of methane, which has not been incorporated into these models. From the latest information that I'm aware of, the models have not included methane, and now we're having a methane meltdown. So it very clearly ends the ambiguity. It means we are out of time. It's time to do it. It means that what our Native brothers and sisters are doing in Standing Rock and at the Klamath Pipeline in California, at the Klamath River, everywhere, that resistance is absolutely life-saving and something we need to be out on the street for, out at the pipelines for. We need to prevent any new fossil fuel infrastructure from being developed. Fortunately, we've had some real successes over the past 10 years in stopping new coal export facilities, in stopping new LNG plants, in stopping some major pipelines. They're pulling out all the stops right now because this is about to be what you call, essentially obsolete. This is about to become stranded assets, I think is the term that's used for it, because the industry is going to collapse. And they're trying to shove it down our throats before that market has collapsed. Because of the dropping price of renewables, because of the dropping price of electric vehicles, the whole fossil fuel market is thought to be really on its way out right now. They're trying to cash in before it's all over. So it's really important that we stop them. It's like as if, when the Second World War started and Pearl Harbor was bombed, we declared a national emergency. Do you know how long it took to transform our economy, unfortunately, to a wartime footing from which it has never retreated? But it took us 6 months. 6 months to transform the economy. We went from 0% of GDP to 25% of GDP. A massive transformation in the course of 6 months. And we did that after one harbor was bombed. We're about to lose all harbors, all coastal areas, population zones. It is 650 million people who will become climate refugees if they're lucky enough to survive the chaos and the dislocation of a massive sea level rise. And it won't be like a slow drip drip. This will be collapsing into the oceans of major ice sheets from the Antarctic and Greenland, basically. As they collapse, sea level really goes up. That didn't happen from the Arctic, because that ice was already in the water. What we're talking about here, when we talk about sea level rise, it's ice sheets that are on rock, they're on land, that tumble into the ocean and raise sea level, not on a drip by drip basis. We don't know how it's going to happen because human beings haven't been around to observe this. And in fact, nothing like this has ever happened before. This is an extremely unnatural phenomenon now, which is why we have to stop it, because what we're looking at is not something that we are going to survive. So if you ever had any doubt about the need for life-saving action, about the need for transformative political change, let this settle all those doubts right here and now, that we have an all-out climate crisis on top of this smoldering economic crisis, a crisis of racism, a crisis of police brutality, a crisis of student debt. All of these really are life and death crises, because poverty and homelessness is a life and death crisis. In fact, we heard Donald Trump talk about making America safe. Making America safe from refugees who have killed 0 people since the American Refugee Act in 1980. There have been 0 American deaths caused by refugees. And there likewise have been no American deaths from the immigrants from the 6 countries that have been named as dangerous to Americans. So there's this pretense out there, there's this alternative fact that this is protecting Americans. To protect Americans, what we really need to do is end poverty, end homelessness, and end poor education. That's how we ensure the security of Americans, because it's, believe it or not, according to a study done by Columbia University School of Public Health, published, I think, 2015, it is 500,000 people every year who die from the associated conditions of poverty and lack of education. And that is homelessness and exposure to the elements and chemicals and lack of health care. 500,000 people. That's how we get to true security. It's not by building walls and building hostility through xenophobia and Islamophobia. That does not make a secure world. We need to be building bridges and tearing down walls, not creating walls. So it's clear, that the likes of Donald Trump grow out of economic despair, and that Trump is actually going to accelerate now the slide into despair with his cabinet of billionaires, with his executive orders that are, restoring or expediting, shall we say, pipelines, and destroying financial regulation, destroying the little bit of a safety net that was provided through Obamacare, through his increasing the budget for the military, as if spending half of our discretionary dollars on the military wasn't bad enough. We're going to do more. But what's really clear is the solution here is not to nitpick these, these attacks coming from Trump. We need a really visionary agenda that takes back the initiative, that can capture the imagination, that can bring people back. It's not by, nitpicking Obamacare. Obamacare isn't going to make the difference. We need health care for everyone as a human right. We need Medicare for all, along with jobs for all, along with higher education for all, along with cutting the military budget at least in half and putting those dollars into true security. We're not going to fix this around the margins. Almost half of people stayed home, half of eligible voters stayed home, because there wasn't something to come out to vote for. You know, here as Greens, we are giving people something to come out to vote for, something to come out and work for, something to come out and register Green for, so that we can actually lay the groundwork and make this happen. So this is a revolt in the making. One of the most powerful elements of that revolt are people who are walking around carrying unpayable predatory student loan debt, which is enough to win any election in just about any race. And that issue for canceling student debt, bailing out students like we bailed out the crooks on Wall Street, we can bail out the students, and in doing so, we can bring enough people into the fold that we can actually win any race. In the presidential election, had they allowed us to get that word out, you know, which is why they should not be in charge, we should be in charge of the presidential debates. We need a People's Debate Commission. If we were able to actually let people know there were 44 million, and there still are, it's 44 million and growing, people who are trapped in student loan debt, that is a plurality in a three-way race at the presidential level. So that was a winning demographic right there. Add to that the Latino and the Chicano demographic, where there are 25 million Latinos who vote, who have citizenship and the right to vote, who will vote on behalf of justice for immigrants. 25 million, add that to the 44 million students, you got 25 million who've been thrown under the bus, not just by Donald Trump, but by the previous president, who was the deporter-in-chief. So there are winning coalitions out there, you know, and we call for a power to the people agenda, which is a Green New Deal, 20 million jobs that will solve the climate crisis and the economic crisis in one fell swoop, make the friggin' wars for oil obsolete, and which will also pay for itself just in the health benefits alone from getting rid of that dirty energy. This is a win-win. Why do we not have this right now? Given the way, you know, the climate is moving now with the recent science, you know, it's all the more reason for us to stand up and for us to refuse to back down on this. We need 100% clean renewable energy, not by 2050, by 2030, maybe by 2025, maybe even sooner. We need to stand up for what we really need here. We also need, obviously, healthcare as a human right, a welcoming path to citizenship, an end to police violence and the war on drugs and mass incarceration, and a foreign policy based on international law, human rights, and diplomacy. Not more of this catastrophic regime change, foreign policy based on economic and military domination, because that is outright, all in all, you know, nothing less than catastrophic. It's cost us $6 trillion, and it's created failed states, mass refugee migrations, worse terrorist threats. That's not going to get us out of here alive. But a foreign policy based on international law and human rights will get us out of here alive. And in fact, what we need in the Middle East is not more bombs and bullets. You cannot shoot terrorism to death, because, you know, you're mostly catching innocent bystanders. You know, that surgical strike with the drones, you know, according to studies, it's about 9 people who are unintended victims for every 1 intended victim. And even that intended victim is not, you know, is not a terrorist, and even if they were a terrorist, they should not be, you know, subject to random assassination and killing. You know, it's not okay. That is a violation of international law. And, you know, it's no wonder that it only proliferates the problem. So justice is the right way to go, and it's the only right way to go. And we can create that world, a world that works for all of us. And it's probably closer than you think, Because look at what is actually happening to Donald Trump. His numbers are going down. He started off rock bottom, and he's only gone down from there. He's had some of his major appointments, had to be terminated, like Michael Flynn. And we'll see what happens with Jeff Sessions. That's not over yet. He's lost, several of his cabinet appointees and has come close to losing some others. And he had to back down on his first immigrant ban and may have to back down on his second. He has a whole lot of lawsuits that have been filed against him. He's actually a minefield of vulnerability because of his 500 businesses, foreign businesses, that essentially many of them violate the Emoluments Clause, a fancy name that means you can't do business with foreign governments because then you become subject to bribery, essentially. And he is like a textbook of bribery. You know what just happened to the president of South Korea? Was just impeached for bribery, and she kind of looks like small potatoes compared to what Donald Trump looks like. Remember what happened to Richard Nixon? One of the most authoritarian, tyrannical, corrupt presidents ever. Even before he was impeached, what did we accomplish under Richard Nixon? EPA. Exactly. What else?
HMO.
What was that?
HMO.
HMOs. Okay, very interesting. I didn't know about that one.
Earth Day.
Earth Day, yes. OSHA, protecting the safety and health of people in the workplace. And how about women's right to choose, which we got from a very conservative Supreme Court. That wasn't Nixon himself, but it was the era of repression and the era of Nixon. And we brought the troops home from Vietnam. So how did we do that, under this very authoritarian president? We did it by getting out in the streets and refusing to go home until the job was done. Now, why were we doing that? We were doing that because our lives were on the line. We had a military draft then, and we knew that we were in danger, our brothers especially our brothers of color, who were getting sent to die in Vietnam. So we were out there, with a passion. And by the way, our sisters were dying at that time as well from illegal abortions too. So, we were out there with, fighting for our lives. And we've come full circle now because once again, people have woken up to realize we are again fighting for our lives. Whether it's against homelessness and poverty, whether it is immigrants facing deportation, that's fighting for your life. Whether it is, fighting against the closure of your schools, lack of education is highly correlated with just all kinds of struggle and mortality and hardship. And then the climate. That's really where all of our lives are on the line, perhaps a whole lot sooner than we would have thought. It's beginning to look like this is going to happen in our lifetimes. So it's not just altruistic of us to stand up on this. This is something we have to do, let alone the pollution of our water supplies. We're seeing where that's going. So we got to be out there. We got to be out there and fighting like our lives depend on it. There are models out there. What happened in East Germany? Chris Hedges reports that in the week before things really happened in East Germany, the advocates for democracy were saying, well, maybe in 10 years we'll start to get somewhere. Things just aren't moving. And then suddenly, lo and behold, the crowds were just surging in the streets. The East German government called out the military to fire on these crowds that were so humiliating them. The police refused to fire because it was moms and baby strollers that were out there, and that was it. Then they got out of town on airplanes, and the wall came down. And so you never know when the forces of tyranny, the walls are about to fall down. And it really, there's no question, we saw this during the election, and it's not as if suddenly the political system has recovered its integrity or, you know, its security. It is still a house of cards that's waiting to come falling down, even if it happens to have a really loud voice and a big bully, you know, in the White House. It is still a house of cards that's about to fall down. So we do absolutely right to prepare the way right now, and to prepare the way to take power and to begin taking power at the local level. So we can really, I think, prepare to make this happen, knowing that Donald Trump's days are numbered. And it's not only Donald Trump, it's whoever replaces him. I mean, if he gets impeached and then it's Pence who inherits it, you know, things aren't going to change. Things aren't going to get better for the 99%. We've been mobilized, and we are not going home, and we're not going away. So we can run candidates at the local office, we can be out there building the social movements, and we can be building the party. And, you know, at the end of the day, we have to end this politics of fear and discover the politics of courage. It would help a whole lot to pass ranked choice voting, and that's something I know that you're talking about here this weekend. And Maine, the state of Maine just did that. There are a lot of states now that are planning to follow in those footsteps. So there are ways that we can move forward and put this lesser evil behind us, because the lesser evil has basically delivered, you know, all the evils that we thought we were going to avoid. All the reasons you're told to vote for the lesser evil because you didn't want the offshoring of our jobs and the meltdown of the climate and the attack on immigrants and our civil liberties and the climate. You know, we've gotten it all by the droves because not we, but other folks out there, you know, gave our voices over to this lesser evil predators who have not stood up for us. You know, they have a better line, they have a better public relations campaign, but they're basically doing the same thing. So it's time for us to stand up and demand the America and the world that works for all of us, that will put people, planet, and peace over profit. We need to stand up for the greater good and reject the lesser evil. Fight for the greater good, like our lives depend on it, because they do. We can have an America and a world that works for all of us, that puts people, planet, and peace over profit, and the power to create that world more than ever, right here and now. It's in our hands, and thank you all so very much for making it so in the work that you are doing here this weekend.
I know that Jill is going to take some questions, but you know, I would be remiss if I did not actually take this opportunity to tell you this: that the campaign, this tour began at Humboldt State University, and we had not only did we have to turn people away, 450 people showed up, and we had to turn people away. Let me show you what the student newspaper, The Lumberjack, did on their front page. And now, let Alicia pull in and show you what Dr. Stein did on that, because she autographed it, and it says, "It's in our hands." Yeah. Heart, Jill. And so, being the fundraiser that I am, I made Dr. Stein, who had spent 8 hours And then I made her sign this many.
Yeah.
So what I'm going to do is, as she takes questions for only $20 to the Green Party of California, you can have an autographed edition of the Humboldt State University Lumberjack. I will be in the corner. Every dollar will go to the Green Party of California. None of it goes to Dr. Stein. None of it ever does. Notwithstanding what either the Russians or Rachel Maddow or whatever the latest one is. So I'm going to bring Jill back up. She is going to take some questions, so I will ask you to be brief and concise with your questions. She will try to be brief and concise. And if you'd like one of these, catch me over at the corner. We're going to go outside so that we don't interfere with the discussion that's going on. So I'm going to bring Jill back up and ask for Jill, could you take some questions?
Yeah, definitely. Yes. So I know it's been a long day, and there's going to be a long day tomorrow too. So we'll try to make this short and, short questions. I'll try to make them lightning round answers, but just so there's some back and forth, because I feel like that's really what, that's what I'm here for, is to share what we have learned over the course of this race, over the course of I think it's like 8 races that I've run now. I've lost track, but you learn a lot by running races, and that's what building a new party is about. It's about sharing this experience so we can shortcut it for each other, because we need lots of us out there running races, winning races, and really taking power back into our own hands, because we are the ones we've been waiting for. So let's have that conversation now, and just put up hands if you have a comment. I'm going to give you a number. 1, 2, 3 over there, 4, 5, 6 in the green shirt, 7, 8. Okay, great. Good. Thank you. Number 1. Yes.
Would you be willing to run for president of California?
Shall we succeed? Do we have a contestant? I would definitely move here. An established residence. Yeah. Number 2. Oh, I'm sorry. The question was, would you be willing to run for president of California? All right, number 2.
I just wanted to have it on record for those Democrats that they argue with me about the fundraising that you did for the recount of the votes.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that to clarify to
Great.
them?
Yes, okay. So the question was, what about the money? Have I really taken the money and run with it? Because we did raise a lot of money, and I think that was really scary to the Democrats to see that, that we came out of this with the ability to do that kind of fundraising. So I have been under attack ever since. You should see how my phone just lights up with all these smear tweets that I get constantly throughout the day. It's actually rather funny. It's just so stupid. I find it hard to take it seriously. It's such an obvious smear campaign. It is just plain old-fashioned character assassination, and I feel flattered to be considered that dangerous, to tell you the truth. So what happened to the money? Okay, so some of the money, and in fact this is all documented on the webpage, and it's all documented for the Federal Election Commission, because all of the money was raised under FEC terms through, basically through a dedicated recount account. So that money is carefully watched, and it is actually carefully kept, because we have ongoing legal cases. The recount is not over, though some people would like it to be over and to sweep it into the dustbin of history. It continues. We are still fighting for votes that we can trust, and a voting system that is accurate, secure, and just, and free from the scourge of Jim Crow, which is what we have been revealing in the course of attempting a recount, which was largely thwarted. And what does that tell you? that tells you there is no accountability in our election system. If you can't go back and recount it, how will you ever know when the worst possible thing may or may not have happened? In most democracies around the world, you actually have automatic recounts. You don't have to go hold a bake sale on steroids and raise millions of dollars in order to know that your vote was accurately counted. It's built in. It should be that way, and it's unbelievably outrageous. California got rid of its electronic so-called touchscreen voting machines, which are an absolute invitation to fraud, to malfeasance, to machine and human error. Thank you, California, once again leading the charge. That should be taken up across the nation. And that was one of the points that we were making, was that by continuing to use these voting machines, and in Pennsylvania, it's like about 85% of votes take place on these machines that do not even provide the semblance of a paper trail. So you're just totally, your vote is going out into the ether, and cross your fingers, good luck. There's no way to know what happened to those votes. And it's so ironic because those who've been screaming about the Russians intruding on our election said, but oh no, there's no way they could have actually gotten to our votes. They just did everything else short of that. So we were definitely not wanting to contribute to the Russia-bashing Cold War hysteria. So we were not screaming the Russians in our voting systems, but it could be anybody in our voting systems hacking into them or just making errors. And this was one of the biggest findings actually in Detroit, which was one of the few places where we were actually able to do a recount, that something like 85 of these voting machines failed on election day. Where did they fail? In poor communities of color. It's the under-resourced communities that are especially vulnerable to machine failure. So it's Jim Crow all over again, in addition to voter suppression, which we know is happening all over the place. So what we are doing now, we're having some follow-up conferences in the states where we ran the recounts, and we are building a unified movement for voting justice. It's not only about the voting machines. It's not only about whether your vote gets counted or thrown away. It's also about voter suppression and the prevention of your vote before you even get to the voting booth. We need a unified movement for voting justice, because if it's a splintered movement, it will never get to critical mass. So this is where the money is going. We have ongoing legal cases which are going to be exciting. We may be going all the way to the Supreme Court in Pennsylvania, so stay tuned. And we have another case in Wisconsin. So there are two cases that they were either started during the recount itself, or they are an outgrowth of the contentions in the during the recount. And if there is money left over, and knock on wood, there may be, that money will be distributed according to a ranked choice vote by the donors as to how they would like those dollars used in order to further advance the causes of voting justice. So anyone who has doubts and is skeptical, they can just go take a look at the budget that accounts for the expenditures so far. They can also go to the FEC website, but they don't want to do that. They are not interested in the facts. This is just a plain old-fashioned, personal smear campaign.
Thank you.
So let that be clear. Number 3.
Yes, Richard Gomez, Fresno County. I was actually going to ask you about the recount. So I guess the only question I can ask is, what do you think that we should be doing to help with the recount?
Thank you. That's a great question. I think stay tuned for one thing. If you're on our email list, you'll hear about developments. These are kind of being fought in the court of law right now, but you can certainly contribute to advancing voting justice right here in California by repealing Top 2 and implementing ranked choice voting instead. Yeah. would be a great gift to the nation. All right, you were number 3. Who's number 4? Okay.
Thank you for taking the lead in the voting, because that's massive. But my other question, how can we get more coalition? Why aren't more people upset about Citizens United, that something can be done about it? Because that is a major obstacle.
Yes. And, clearly we need a constitutional amendment that clarifies that corporations are not people and money is not speech. And I want to give another shout out to David Cobb. I don't know if he's still in the room. Maybe he's just outside. But yes, there are people who continue to work on this movement to end the rights of personhood being applied to corporations and the fiction that money is speech. Because it's that fiction that enables them to get away with this idea that you should be able to spend limitless amounts of money because it's speech. It's not speech, it's money. And, and people should not be allowed to hoard political speech any more than they should be allowed to hoard limitless amounts of money, either, for that matter. In my home state in Massachusetts, we actually passed campaign finance reform, which is the real answer, or it's one of the ways to answer that, because it's hard to have a constitutional amendment. That's not easy, especially in today's climate. But we could pass public funding for candidates, which takes the rug out from under big money system. Because if candidates can run, and the other piece of this is free media, we should be able to use the public airwaves for public purpose. The minute you do that, the bottom comes out of the cost of campaigns. So those two things together can enable us to reclaim it. How do we get to that? What we learned in Massachusetts, we built a big coalition, a very big progressive coalition with labor and women and environment and public health and others. And we passed campaign finance reform, public funding, by voter referendum by a huge margin, like 2-1. And what happened after we passed it? The Democratic legislature repealed it on a voice vote in a Democratic Party caucus of the legislature. They repealed it, which said to me, the future is not in the Democratic Party. And if we're ever going to get campaign finance reform, we need a political party of, by, and for the people. So that question of how do we get it, I hear that question, with regard to healthcare as a human right, to, nuclear disarmament, to acting on the climate, all these things that our lives literally depend on, including cleaning up our politics, which is sort of like the mother of all illnesses up there. How do we do any of that? We've got to get to critical mass. A political party is a coalition. It's a coalition with an explicit agenda, and for us, it's an agenda for people, planet, and peace over profit. That is our agenda. It's clear what we're about. We're not this nebulous big tent, like the Democratic Party that has room for the neocons and for the Romney supporters who don't like Donald Trump. We have a clear agenda. And we work on staying together. That's what a political party is. You work on maintaining that alliance, and then you can go anywhere. You can go into any of those issues. As individual people, we feel overwhelmed by the totality of what's going on and how scary it is. But as a party, you got lots of different people who develop their expertise on those different things, and we help each other out so that we can seize strategic openings. And it's different in different communities at different runs for office as to what's the particular mix of the issues. But that's the role of a state party or a national party, is to help fill in how do you roll out that agenda and how do you make the case and run for office on that basis. So ultimately, I think that's the answer to all of the questions here tonight. How do we get there? It's by building a strong party. Thank you. Number 5. Yes. Hi.
Eric again. Okay. I'll go with the original.
Okay.
You've heard it before. I've been through the watching of my mother going through chemo, and it's no fun. And frankly, I think chemo is murder. So I'm just gonna try again. I think it would be a very media-provoking stance for a doctor to come out and say the truth about chemo when you look at the fact that Jimmy Carter's and John McCain's of the world get some sort of something, you know, in 3 weeks their stuff's all gone, you know. So truth will set us free. Just like you to consider a stance like that and maybe do it in a big Fox News media thing that could get some views, you know. It's just an idea. Also, what's your favorite book?
So the chemo thing, you know, a lot depends on the particulars of the case, and there's some cases where chemo is just deadly and it's not going to help, but there are other cases where it does. And for all I know, you know, I don't know exactly what treatment Jimmy Carter got, but I think he got sort of the latest and greatest version of chemo, but now it's more immune system stuff. So, you know, they refine it and hopefully make improvements. You know, I think at the end of the day, and I'd be glad to talk to you afterwards about, you know, what was the story with your mother's case. You know, it sounds really tragic and painful, and I'm very sorry about that. You know, to my mind, there are two really big tragedies right now that apply to everybody. One is that we don't have access to the best of health care. Everybody should have access to Jimmy Carter's treatment, you know, everybody should. You shouldn't have to buy your way into that or have been a president of the United States in order to get it. Everybody should have a right to the best. That's what a good healthcare system is about. But the other tragedy is that we make people sick. Not only do we deprive people of care, we actually make people sick. It's not just that we neglect health, we actually poison health. Through our food system, through the chemicals that are running into the water right here in Bakersfield and all over the world, actually. The pesticides that are, you know, that people are exposed to, especially farm workers and poor people who live in public housing, who get fumigated. And, you know, poverty is associated with cancer in part because people who are poor cannot protect themselves from, you know, from the chemical industry and its excesses and its profiteering. So, you know, we need to start protecting people, and our regulatory agencies need to have house cleaning, and they need to be cleaned up of the predators, of the Monsantos, of the chemical industry, of the pharmaceutical industry, you know, who are using our regulatory agencies to advance their bottom line. So that's a tragedy that we can fix. Both of those tragedies we can fix. And how do we fix them? By building a strong party and putting together that coalition. Because once we get together, if we're divided one compelling issue at a time, we never get to critical mass. But the minute we come together for a broad and unifying agenda, we are absolutely unstoppable. And one other thing I should just throw out there is that in addition to building the party and running candidates for office, we also, you know, there are other tools that we need to be thinking about now, and there's a lot of discussion now about strikes, about general strikes. And, you know, we just had a little bitty kind of international women's strike, which just, it was kind of the beginnings, sort of starting to explore that. And there's another one called for as a day without immigrants, but also a sympathy strike on May Day. And, you know, we need to think about developing this tool of a general strike. And the concept is out there of a strike for people, planet, and peace over profit. So it's a unifying strike that could bring us together across these many issues, because that's when you really get to a strike that will stop the wheels of destruction, the wheels that are destroying the economy and our ecology. Those wheels need to be brought to a halt by a coalition that is big enough to make that happen, and it can be global, you know, and to really demonstrate that we the people, you know, are unified here for a vision of justice, and that we do have the power, and that power crosses the boundaries of issues, and it crosses national borders. And what an amazing, day that would be if we just brought things to a halt to show what our power is. But it's not power for a nebulous idea. It is a power with a very concrete agenda. And this is, stay tuned, because this is something that may develop going forward. Back in 2014, people remember the climate march of 2014? Big march in New York. Big march without an agenda. So 500,000 people came out, and it came and went. But as part of that mobilization, there was a conference called the Convergence, the Climate Convergence. And the full name for that was the Climate Convergence for People, Planet, and Peace over Profit. And before it was called the Climate Convergence, it was actually called the Climate Strike for People, Planet, and Peace over Profit. But as we vetted that idea, it was too soon. People were not ready for that, but it sounds like people are kind of ready for that now. So we may be dragging out some of those materials that we developed back then and starting to just put them out there for public discussion. And just by way of preparing, towards that tool of the general strike, general strike means that, people who are working for their income and who aren't going to be going to work need a means of support. It's one thing when it's just a day, but it's another thing when it gets to be a week or 2 weeks or something like that. So just developing the capacity to support people, to start building strike funds, food banks, things like that, to keep workers going in the case of a strike. Because if you really want a strike that's going to get places, you want transportation workers to be on your side, because that will really turn things around very quickly if transportation workers can be persuaded to strike for a different kind of transportation, which would make them incredibly healthier as well as everyone else. So just by way of sort of sharing ideas for the future, things that we'll probably be discussing in the Green Party at various levels. We'll be talking about, I think at the national level, are we going to endorse this strike coming up? Which I think is a no-brainer, to support the May 1st strike for a day without immigrants, but to also use that as a springboard towards larger, more unifying strikes, where we're striking for an explicit agenda. And we do have this 10-point agenda, by the way, which includes striking on behalf of the rights of immigrants and striking on behalf of the right to a job. It's like our Power to the People plan, but it's put into a sort of simplified 10-point format. So it's just mull that over for a little while. What is that? I mean, imagine that. Imagine a global strike for the Green Party's agenda, essentially, for People, Planet, and Peace. It could happen. Well, what's my favorite book? Oh God, I have to admit, I mostly read nonfiction because I'm a geek for facts. So the last book I read, oh God, you don't want to know. Oh God, by McCarthy. I want to say The Day After, but that's not what it was called. It is about sort of when civilization collapses. The Road, yes, it was The Road. It was the last book I read. Before that, it was actually Love in the Time of Cholera.
Oh, wow.
Great book. And my favorite music, I got asked this the other night. Victor Hara, Public Enemy. And who was the third? I'm trying to remember. I'll think of it before the night is over. Okay, number 6. Yes.
I have a question that pretty much deals with people who live here in the San Joaquin Valley,
Yes.
and that is legal immigration policy. That we get this all the time where we live. People are petrified because they're afraid they're going to be taken at any time, and sent to who knows where. We've had assurances from our local politicians that they will respect, the the state of California being a place that this won't happen, but I don't trust their name. So my question to you is, what should be the major policy of the Green Party towards a really good legal immigration policy that will protect these people from having their families destroyed?
Yes. So number one, we need to immediately cease and desist from night raids, detentions, and deportations. So we stop them and we create a welcoming path to citizenship. And to deal with the crisis of immigration, we do a really novel thing. We stop causing it.
Yeah.
Because it is a hardship on everybody to have to pack up and migrate. So, above all, we stop destroying other economies through things like NAFTA and other forms of trade agreements, which displace millions of farmers and also factories south of the border as well as north of the border. We stop the war on drugs, and we basically legalize marijuana, which is the workhorse of the drug industry, and we actually deal with the problems of addiction, which is really a crisis of hopelessness above all. And we treat people when they want treatment. We don't make them wait. We give them treatment on demand, and we also establish safe houses for using drugs. So we stop the death epidemic. It's not so hard to deal with. And we certainly decriminalize at the very least, and we actually legalize, at least for marijuana. And we take marijuana and hemp off the list of scheduled substances. We do a radical thing and we apply science. And we also stop overturning other democracies, like in Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala, which is where most of the refugees have come from. And then the war on drugs, which has killed 100,000 people in Mexico alone. So we have had a major hand in creating the vast majority of this crisis. So for those who have a problem with the influx of immigrants, let's stop turning people into refugees, and then let's stop criminalizing them when they get here. Number 7, I think? Yes. Okay.
So you do an inspiring job of relating to the world in the facts and the fact-based world we like to live in. What is your favorite way to bring the conversation back to that, or just deal with it when you are confronted with people who are not willing to join us in the fact-based world?
Truth to tell, I don't worry about that world too much because it's a fake world. It's a world of big corporate media that's just manipulating people, essentially. It's a world of manipulators. And, they can do their own thing. And even with the biggest megaphone you can imagine, they're still not winning it. They may be in charge because the system is so corrupt. But that's the goal to me, is to create a system with integrity and to create our own alternative communications, because we can do an end run around corporate media. When I was first tricked into running for office back in 2002, and so beware out there, because many of you are about to be tricked as well, and you should be. Because once you get into it, you discover it's not what you expected at all. It's really just, it's an honest conversation. It's an honest conversation that people are dying to have. And you have to work your butt off as part of that, because the system doesn't want you to be in it. So you have to really fight to be in it. But as you get through to people, there are so many people who are just, they're starving for real honest conversation. As I think I said earlier today, they can smell if you're a rat and if you're not a rat. And they're really hungry to have elected officials who are not rats. Whether they know the facts or not, they can smell. They can smell what kind of a person you are, whether you are a person or a rat. And so when you get out there as an honest person, you're going to feel very appreciated, not by the media, not by the big players, not by the nonprofit industrial complex, but by everyday people. So having been tricked into that race, you know, it was like I did it out of desperation, but I came out of it with inspiration to see, oh my God, there's this real world of real people out there that want to have a real community and a real democracy. And I haven't been able to stop running for office ever since. That was like in 2002, because it just felt like, oh my God, this really is how we can save the world. We can save the world, because in theory we're a democracy. We're not in practice, but we're in theory, and people really hunger for it. So we fought our way into a televised debate, because even in 2002, people were, you know, just tearing their hair out, having to listen to Tweedledee and Tweedledum being shoved down their throats. So we got into this televised debate in a TV studio, no live audience. And in the course of that debate, I gave voice to the usual green agenda, to green our energy system, to provide living wage jobs, to provide health care as a human right, quality education that teaches to the whole student for lifetime learning, not to a high-stakes test, and demilitarizing our foreign policy, cutting the military. And those ideas went over like a lead balloon inside of that debate hall, which was the other candidates and the moderator. And a camera person, who was the person that I spoke to, because it was like the one real human being in the room. And you know, nobody even wanted to debate those ideas. They were so off the charts. So I felt, you know, like, well, you know, I didn't really expect much different, because we thought that we were the lunatic fringe, as we were told. And when I walked out of that debate, it was over. I felt like I did my duty. We walked out to where the press was waiting, and to my shock, I was mobbed by the press, who told me that I had won the debate on the instant online viewer poll. Nobody knew that there was an instant online viewer poll. And you can be sure that was the last time they did an instant online viewer poll in a debate, because they don't want to see how reviled these candidates and their policies are, which they really are. The feelings that we feel towards them are the feelings that most people feel towards them, unless they, you know, have some kind of a stake in the system. You know, and they're on the payroll, or they have security and you know, a comfortable little niche that they're trying to protect. But that's not most people, especially nowadays. So when that happened, you know, of course I was taken out of the debate, because it was clear that at that point I was really a threat, and I could not be, you know, seen or heard from again. And
that worked.
I know, they expect us to like retreat, and they expect us to be intimidated, you know, and they're not used to greens that we just don't go away. And we don't give up. And, you know, that's why I describe myself as a mother on fire, and I think we are all mothers on fire. Mother is not limited by gender, you know. We're all capable of, you know, identifying with, in a very intimate way, with the people coming up beneath us, whether we are biological parents to them or not. And I think a lot of us are on fire right now about the state of the world. And we're not going to go away. And I think that's becoming, you know, more and more a common thing. At any rate, the curtain came up for me that night, and it's like it totally transformed my understanding of politics. I always thought we had to change people's minds. And that night I learned that we don't have to change people's minds. They agree with us. All we have to do is figure out how to do an end run around the corporate media and the corporate institutions that silence us. We just got to find our way around them to get to everyday people, and we will mobilize. And so for my part, I'm not too worried about the people who don't agree with us, because they are not going to lead the way forward. But the people who don't know about us, like the people in Bakersfield, you know, the majority of people in Bakersfield, who I'm sure are not voting because, you know, they don't have a system that allows them to vote for candidates who are for them. It's like in Texas. Texas flipped from being a Democratic state to a Republican state shortly after the Democrats adopted big corporate money and big corporate financing in the era like of the Clintons, and Democrats started becoming big money collaborators, Texas flipped from being a blue state to a red state because they no longer had people to come out and vote for. And that's really kind of what's happened, to our whole political system. So I don't worry too much about changing the minds of people who are dead set against us because they've got a comfortable niche. They're gonna go to their grave, thinking the way they do. In fact, the people that I used to hang out with and used to work with, a lot of people in the toxics movement who were also like healthcare people, they don't understand at all. The minute I started running for office, it was like, goodbye, and they call me once every 4 years to tell me not to run, and it's like your world changes a little bit, it's a little bit dislocating, but, you just, you realize I could have spent years trying to persuade them to change their minds. In the time that it would take you to change one of their minds, those who have a comfortable niche, you can change the mind of thousands of other people who are really ready to go. So that's where we need to focus, and that's what the future lies.
Yeah.
Number 8, I think.
Hi, Jill. Carol from San Bernardino County. I was wondering if you could clarify your remarks about vaccines for all these people that are still rattling on about about how kooky you are and so forth.
That's part of that garden variety character assassination, that they make stuff up. And it's true, I was a critic of mercury in vaccines, and you know what happened? They took the mercury out of the vaccines. And I'm also a critic of the FDA's coziness with Monsanto, with agribusiness, with the pesticide industry, and with the pharmaceutical industry. So, I think in many ways this is a fight back for those who don't like to see our agencies criticized for being on the take. And I think that's where that comes from. I get vaccinated, my kids got vaccinated, my husband gets vaccinated. As a physician working at a college, I made lots of people get vaccinated even when they didn't want to get vaccinated. Ideally, you live in a society where you don't have to force medical treatments on people, and I have very mixed feelings about that. Most other countries do not force medical treatments on people. People have enough faith in their healthcare institutions that they have very high rates of vaccinations. It's a real reflection of how corrupted this country is and how much public confidence has been lost in our basic institutions that we have to mandate vaccinations. If we got the money out of our regulatory institutions, we wouldn't have to mandate it. Exactly, they're raking us over the coals, and it is a problem. Vioxx, was a scandal at the FDA. The FDA allowed over 100,000 cases of serious heart disease to go down before the FDA divulged what the industry knew. The industry knew that it was dangerous and that it had a track record for heart attacks. But the industry would not share that. They suppressed that information. The FDA suppressed that information. And it wasn't the committee. It wasn't the committee that was regulating Vioxx. It was the higher-ups that were suppressing the findings of that committee. So it's, the evidence is really clear that our regulatory institutions are corrupted. And people who don't like that message make this stuff up about me being anti-vax. That's all it is. It is a smear. And again, I take it as a great compliment.
What about cancer? Do we have a cure?
Jill, we only have the hall till 10 p.m.
Okay, let's continue down the line, and we'll
That was the last one.
try to make this more lightning rod. I think,
You keep
was there a
saying that.
9? Was there a 9?
No,
All right, 8 was the last one. Let me just
Did I
a couple
follow
last
up?
things for people who haven't had a question yet. We're 9, 10, 11. Anybody else? All right, we'll try to make this. All right, 12 and 13. All right, lightning round, okay?
So, this one has to do with like, the media and like what I witnessed while I was at Standing Rock, right?
Yeah.
Basically, you know, media was getting shot with rubber bullets and they didn't want anybody getting anything out, right? And, it's just like,
Yeah, say that again. The media was what?
media was shut out at Standing Rock,
Yes.
you know? And it took a lot of independent media to actually capture anything.
Yes.
And like, you know, the Young Turks, they finally got somebody that was out in the field, Jordan Sheridan, to actually like start capturing some of the stuff that was happening in real time. And what I was wondering is, as things like the Klamath Pipeline and Trans-Pecos and these things happen, and as the Green News Network builds,
Yes.
is it possible to get somebody in the field to be able to start going to the front lines of things to show the real story on behalf of the Green?
Absolutely. Yes. Great. And let's follow up about that. Great. Terrific. Thank you. Number 10.
You just talk about May Day,
Yes.
and one of the things is we work with the Coalition for Immigrant Rights, Civil Rights for Immigrants,
Yes.
and we actually do the march every year, normally. And in this year it's gonna be a general strike with a march. But we always face the problem that we do it old-fashioned. We pass flyers.
Yes.
And we always are inundated, like me, with 4,000 flyers to give up, to pass, you know. So most of them end on my shelf.
Mm-hmm.
Are we in some way to collaborate with the coalition, the California party, to actually help them?
Yes.
Because I'm sure in a moment I'm gonna get a box.
Yes.
And not only me, my other friends are gonna get a box with 4,000 flyers that we're gonna run all over California trying to get. I mean, 1 week, 2 weeks only, we get 1,000 pass for more effort that we do. Are we trying to contact that organization and offer help as a party, you know, to actually make it big? Because we need to do something in May Day.
Yes.
I think that's an absolute great idea, and I don't know if there is.
I have a comment on that. We have a idea for my journalist group South Peninsula already to start a May Day event for Barrington County, and our Green Party will most definitely be involved.
Great, and I wonder if there's the possibility to also take that up in some way at the state level to help offer that to other local chapters. I don't know.
Organizing is local.
What's that?
County party, organizing is local, handing out flyers. It's a matter of contacting the people you know. A state party, I don't think, has the best angle on something like that.
Well, I think the question is whether it could be introduced as a resolution for the group to vote on in order for it to be adopted. Whether it is, is it possible to introduce a resolution?
We can just take it back to our county councils.
Take it to your
We're all
county
here,
council.
we're all gonna go home and prepare for May 1st anyway.
Yeah.
There's also, tomorrow, there's a green issues working group meeting, which will be mostly dedicated to clean energy, but you can talk about that very subject, or we could bring it up with green issues, and we could talk about the logistics of how to get the flyers out to different people so that they're not just sitting in the box.
When
We
is
can
that
work
logistics,
out.
when is that logistics meeting? The
It's,
green issues meeting?
Green issues is tomorrow does somebody have in front of them? I think we changed it to 3.
Okay.
Not 3, but 1:55.
1:55, okay.
So,
All right, great.
and if you can't do it at that, just contact the county council, and we can help by contacting all the counties and saying, how do we get these people?
And we could also promote it on the Green News Network, and that way we can get it out, across all the country.
Because as you know, the coalition for full rights for immigrants is not a huge coalition.
Yes,
It's
right.
just a few of immigrant lawyers that team up together to organize something. It's
Yes.
why we got to rely on organizations like you to actually offer a little bit of
Right.
help to make a successful event.
Yes.
Otherwise, it doesn't have the impact that it should be.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think that's a really great idea.
What county are you in?
We are in LA, we come out of over there, but actually it's a general strike.
Yeah.
It gotta be applied everywhere where it can reach.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Good. Do you have a contact information for people to get in touch with you?
Yeah, actually, I got contact information, I got business card, and I can put them in touch with the actual organization.
Yeah.
To work straight, to cut the middleman, and then we can have a whole of understanding with them to organize the distribution of more flyers and publicity.
Do you wanna just announce your contact information now for people?
Right on the board.
Yeah.
Right on the board.
Seize the moment. Yeah. While you do that, we'll go on to our next questions because we have to be out of here soon. Yes, number 10, 11.
If a person can't vote, they're given the wrong information, they've lost something.
Mhm.
There should be some kind of compensation for that. And if in fact it were done by a machine company that made a machine that, and lost a whole city, or, you know, that should be, they should be charged.
Yeah.
If it puts them out of business, that would be the end of the machine,
Yeah.
okay? And the good riddance, right?
Good point. Yeah, the point was that if voting machines are making errors, or they've been hacked, you know, they're vulnerable and all that. So if they are dropping votes, there should be a price to pay for that, because this is a private industry which is making a lot of money by providing this service. There should be some liability here. That's a very good point. Thank you.
And it doesn't have to be a machine company. It could be somebody who manages to hack them.
Or shreds thousands of
Yeah.
personal ballots.
Or gives the person a wrong ballot,
Yes.
which they did in California, a lot of places.
That's a very good point. Yeah, thank you. I think you were 11, 12? Yes.
Shane TV, Los Angeles, 2020.
Yes.
Oh, congratulations, 2020. You know, who knows what'll happen between now and then, but I mean, I'm not about to stop now doing everything I can. If there was a congressional race or something, you know, else that might be more winnable, that might provide more of a breakthrough and more of a shot in the arm to the party, you know, that might be, you know, I'm willing to do whatever is the best use of my, what I have to offer, you know. And I'm just here to fight the fight and be a part of the fight in whatever way I can. And if the need is there for me to run for the presidency again, yes, I would definitely do that. It doesn't get harder, I have to say.
Yes.
In many ways, it does get easier. I can't say it's easy, but what is easy, you know, nowadays? It's not easy to find a job. It's not easy, you know. In many ways, it's easier to run for office than to try to, you know, pay back your student loans or something like that. You know, I feel like I have it pretty good. So, yeah, I will do whatever I can in the most effective way that I can. And I think that's for all of us to decide. So I'd say, you know, the more prepared we are to fight hard, you know, I'm going to be part of that team no matter what. And I think, you know, we should be fighting at all levels, and we should not give them a pass. at the presidential level. And the threat of our running strong for president should be reason for all legislatures right now to adopt ranked choice voting. They could do that themselves without having to have a voter referendum. Legislatures could just pass it and ensure themselves that there's not going to be any splitting of the vote. But actually, that's not what they're worried about, you know. They're most worried about a real politics of the people getting a foothold. So we got to do what we got to do. Let's see, last question, yes.
America is a leader in research and development in science and technology. And I'm concerned because we are approaching a point in civilization where we can go into a complete collapse or we can achieve the singularity. And I'm wondering, in medicine, what we're doing, what we could be doing. Could we eradicate diseases? And what's keeping us from doing that?
Yeah, so let me just say that the point of our economy and our healthcare system is not health, it's not security, it's not justice, it's profit. And that's why I think, you know, our basic motto is people, planet, and peace over profit. You can't get one of these without getting all of them. And you can't get them without beating back the stranglehold that profiteering has on our political and economic system. We could massively reduce illness now, not by curing it, but by preventing it. And we know that I think it's even more than that. I think it's like 80%, according to the CDC. It's like 75 or 80% of chronic disease, which is the vast majority. Or let me put this another way. It's like 75 to 80% of diseases are chronic illnesses caused by things like chemical exposures, a industrialized diet, and a lack of recreation and exercise opportunities, which should be built into our communities. We should be able to use muscle power to get where we're going and to have bike paths and safe sidewalks, and kids should be able to walk to school, and we should be able to walk and bike to transit hubs, things like that. If we were doing things like that, we would massively cut the burden of disease. And the proof of this is what happened in Cuba when their oil pipeline went down and they had a massive economic crisis and they all got so much healthier. You know, it's like the opposite of what ought to happen when a society is really stressed is what happened. And their death rates from diabetes went down 30%, their death rates, no, 50%. Their death rates from heart attacks and strokes went down 30%, and all-cause mortality went down 20% just by ending the fossil fuel pollution, by restoring muscle-powered transportation, so people were biking and using public transportation and walking, and by cleaning up the air. The air suddenly was clean, and everybody got healthier. And how much did it cost them? Zero. What did it cost us? $3 trillion. In order to be one of the sickest modern societies in the world. So we're paying massive amounts of money just to run in place, barely, but we're not even running in place. We're actually getting sicker, and longevity is being reduced, and it's going hand in hand with declining economic security as well. So it's all pretty simple, you know, it really boils down to taking power and doing the obvious things, creating jobs that establish a healthy society, food, energy, and transportation system, and making wars for oil obsolete while we're at it. So we can fix it. It's all about our standing up and insisting that we're not going to take no for an answer, and using this incredible crisis moment to build common cause across so many issues, building a coalition that actually gets to critical mass, and a coalition that is begging to be born right now. So the future really is in our hands. It's about rejecting the lesser evil and fighting for the greater good. We can create the world. Before you So we're going to take a selfie.